Thank you. Sorry for that interruption. And Provost Helble, take it away.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So good to see you all. And Rosie, thanks for teeing us up. It's a pleasure to be able to join you for the conversation this evening. So I'm Joe Helbley. I'm the Provost of Dartmouth College, and I've been at Dartmouth for 16 years. For the first 13 of those years, I was the Dean of the Thayer School of Engineering. And in terms of my professional background, my career, going back to the research I did as well an undergraduate student and then as a PhD student, has focused on the environmental implications of energy conversion, specifically focused on fossil fuel conversion, fossil fuel utilization. And so it has not been sustainability focused per se, but it has all been focused on reducing pollutant emissions and trying to build opportunity for bridging to a more sustainable energy future. Some of my work's focused on mercury emissions, a lot of it focused on particulate matter. And for a period of time, my lab was also looking at ways to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. And so as a scientist and an engineer, this is an area that's been of great interest to me from my student days. And certainly as the Provost and Chief Academic Officer, it's of great interest to me as a step forward for Dartmouth as a community. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Rick Mills, our EVP. Rick?
Welcome, everybody, and thanks for having me. Thanks for chiming in and showing up for this event, and Rosie and team in Sustainability Office, thanks for organizing it. I am Executive Vice President at Dartmouth. Joe and I are the sort of two parallel reports to President Hanlon. Joe on the academic side, I'm on the administrative side. I've been at Dartmouth almost 8 years, came here from Harvard Medical School, and oddly, before Harvard Medical School, I worked at a wastewater utility in Boston, Massachusetts Water Resources Authority. And my career began as an attorney, but quickly ended up in sort of public service, public entity, nonprofit activities. I would say from the wastewater experience, there was a lot based on sustainability. We did a lot around material recovery from wastewater streams and digestion. Energy was a big focus around anaerobic digestion and how we use methane to do generation that would help support the pumping activities of wastewater. And once I moved to higher ed and ended up at Harvard Medical School, there was a public health component to sustainability that entered into the picture as well. So I think from sort of energy management, efficiency, and then environmental and public health standpoint, sustainability has been a large part of my jobs, even though I'm not in a sustainability role per se. And with that, I will turn it over to Josh Keniston.
Thanks, Rick. Good to see everyone. So I'm Josh Keniston, the Vice President of Campus Services and Institutional Projects. Been at Dartmouth for just over 3 years now. And when I started here at Dartmouth, one of my primary projects was really looking at how do we transform our energy system. And as I look at my career more broadly, I was a consultant before coming to Dartmouth, and a lot of what my work life has been about is how do we take sticky problems that don't have kind of a single clear path forward and build a solution that is inclusive of a lot of different viewpoints and is, one that maybe has to evolve over time. And I think that's a lot of what we have to deploy here, which is yesterday's solution may not be tomorrow's solution, and we have to live in a little bit of gray area a lot of times with these types of projects, but have to continue to move forward. So trying to bring that to the work that we do here.
So our format this evening, we're gonna move directly into questions. Our Sustainable Dartmouth interns, who I wanna give a brief shout out to, Rachel, Jasmine, and Jess, have organized this event. And for about 2 weeks or so, they've been crowdsourcing questions. So we took those questions and we pulled 7 of the most common ones together to ask our panelists. Following these prepared questions, we'll have an open Q&A. So we'll ask you to stay muted until that portion of the program. And you can either raise your hand to ask a question, or you can put a question in the chat, which might be the more efficient way to do it, so we can we can pose that question. We're also going to capture any questions we don't answer today and put them in a written form, and then circulate those questions for answering, and then recirculate that back out to you guys so that we can try to get to all the things that people want to hear about. So with that, I'm going to kick us off with our first question here. And I'm going to aim this one at you, Provost Helble, because it's sort of a strategic question. What, from your perspective, is Dartmouth's role as a leader in the global fight against climate change and towards sustainability? And what is our moral responsibility?
So thanks, Rosie. And that's a great high-level question and a great way to start. And so I think first and foremost, right, what are colleges and universities responsible for doing? What's our core business? We teach and we educate, we teach and we conduct research. And so by teaching, we are working collaboratively with our students to help transfer knowledge and ask critical questions, and help teach our students to ask critical questions and become critical thinkers and challenge existing systems and existing paradigms. And then by research, of course, we are asking those questions. We are developing new technologies. If we're an engineer, we are probing science to ask leading questions and help understand how the world works. And then, of course, in the humanities, we're asking questions that help reframe our conversation and our thinking. Well, if we think about the fight against climate change, if we think about sustainability, clearly there's a huge educational moment, right? For college, a huge educational role for colleges and universities to play. If there were no need for this, right, we would have a society where everyone acknowledged the science and recognized that we needed to take action fairly imminently to address the challenge, the climate challenge, and take steps towards a more sustainable energy future. But another role I think colleges and universities can play, and this is something I hope we'll have time to talk a little bit about, is universities can lead, right? We can take steps to challenge ourselves to be more aggressive in meeting important societal goals than society at large. We can be leaders in transitioning our energy sources to more sustainable energy sources. We can be leaders in trying to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions more aggressively than society at large. We can be leaders in exploring implementation of new technologies that may not be fully proven and commercial, but have the opportunity to help advance us towards our goals. And so I think at our core, when you ask what's our obligation first and foremost is to educate. Our obligation is to conduct research, science and non-science alike, to help push the world forward towards developing the solutions we need. But I think our opportunity and our obligation is also to be leaders, to experiment, to take steps to move faster than society as a whole is moving or able to move in addressing some of these challenges and these questions.
How would you say that impacts our operations? And maybe I'll open this up. What is our moral obligation as relates to our operations? And maybe I'll open that up to Rick or Josh if you want to chime in on that.
I'm not sure I'd chime in on what our moral obligation is. I'm not sure I'm the right person to opine about what Dartmouth's moral obligation is, but I think what Joe just shared makes a lot of sense and actually provides some context for thinking about how do you translate his observation that we have this primary mission of teaching and research and an opportunity and perhaps obligation to establish leadership and show folks a path forward. All of that, when you get down to budgeting and funding operations, means we have to balance how we invest in each of those three elements. And thinking about how we maintain need-blind admissions and build state-of-the-art research labs, while at the same time try to invest and push in the infrastructure that would make us a leader on environmental matters as just an institution. It's always a tough conversation, and there are always trade-offs. And I think how those get balanced and how it's not just what we say we care about, but in the end, what are we investing in? And I think you can see a clear track record that says we have typically prioritized teaching and research, but we're recognizing that we perhaps need to skew more heavily toward this funding, this leadership piece, and how do we make those work? And the trustees in their last meeting just created a funding mechanism out of endowment that will help us make some of that shift possible. So I think the trustees have embraced the notion that Dartmouth as a leader on these topics matters as well.
Josh, I'm going to turn to you for our next question. Folks on this call are mostly aware that Dartmouth isn't going to build a biomass plant as the next step with our energy future. What is the plan instead to upgrade our outdated energy infrastructure?
Yeah, and I think one of the things I'd just point out is when we were talking about the green energy project, biomass was, as we looked at the kind of overall investment, biomass was a quarter to a third of what we were looking at. The foundation of the project has always been a conversion from steam to hot water, and we remain committed to that. And so I think the focus of our work over the last year, and as we look at the years ahead, has really been about how do we get our campus off of inefficient steam onto more efficient hot water, and how do we pair that with opportunities down the line. One of the great things about moving to hot water is it's a far more flexible system, and so it lets us take a little bit more of an iterative approach. And so I think partly what we're thinking is, rather than having a single central plant, which is what the biomass plant would have been, can we have a more distributed network, and can we experiment with heat pumps and geo exchange, or other solar opportunities, or in 10 years are there new technologies that aren't yet ready that we could now plug into our system. So our plan is really to focus on that conversion from steam to hot water, and I think what sometimes gets lost in that is, in order to do that, that also means doing some pretty deep energy retrofits. Part of how you make a campus ready to accept lower temperature hot water is to just reduce the amount of energy that each building is going to require to heat and cool it. So those have always been the foundation. I think we're really doubling down on that piece of it. And then that is going to allow us to experiment with some other forms of generation in the years to come.
Rick, I wondered if you, sorry, go ahead. Add to
Yeah,
that.
no, just an observation about the pivot away from biomass, which to some degree goes back to the slides you were showing about our green future. Early on, those goals include a renewability goal. And what I think what happened in the science from the time that report was published to when we pivoted away from biomass was recognition of the temporal urgency of reducing carbon emissions. The biomass plant was renewable and it was carbon neutral, but over a very long carbon cycle of debatably somewhere between 35 and 100 years. And so I think one of the things that we're chasing here is the evolution of science and thinking as we build policy. And when you think about an institution like Dartmouth at scale and 250 years old, most institutional planning happens over long periods of time. Science is changing more quickly, and part of what our plan needs to learn to do is be nimble and be able to respond to those kinds of pivots and shifts. And I think we're getting better at it. We've got more we can learn. But Josh enumerated two things that I think are key. One is that the core change is actually going from steam to hot water. And the other is that every bit of energy that we don't use is carbon that we don't emit. So thinking about deep building conversions, also challenging in our climate that we live in here in Northern New England, and the fact that we have buildings that in some cases are more than 100 years old. So figuring out how to make that balance work is one of the challenges.
Joe, did you want to add to that?
No, I was going to say something very similar to what Rick said, building on Josh's comments. I think the key, as Josh outlined, is what this flexibility moving away from biomass provides is the ability to experiment, to look at different ways to inject heat into the system at different points on the campus and truly figure out which are the technologies that are going to give us the best return for our investment. Return, not financial return, but energy return for our investment. And so, that's, let me leave it at that.
And I think meaningfully, that means a shift away from new combustion, which is really important, and towards non-combustion technologies. Rick, I'm going to aim this next question at you. Broadly, how far have we come in our sustainability goals, and what are your priorities moving forward? What do you see as our future direction?
Well, so I think the question of how far have we come is from where is the starting point. We've come a long way from where we were in 1975. But I don't think that's the right answer for now. I think to me, in the time that I've been here since 2013, there have been a couple of important moments of progress. One is the president embracing and articulating a set of goals. And I think the notion that we can adapt those goals as science improves, as technology improves, the goalposts are going to change, and we just need to keep moving toward them and in that direction. I think the institution being able to have spent a bunch of time programming and designing a solution that was based around biomass, and in a relatively short period of time, be able to pivot away and say, we hear you, we hear what the science is, we hear about the temporal pressure on carbon reductions, and we're going to shift, and we're going to stop right now, and we see elements of our plan, the hot water conversion, that are absolutely worth keeping, but we're going to move away from where we thought we were going. And for an institute, it's a little bit like getting the Titanic to stop quickly and say, maybe instead of going to England, we should go to Bermuda, and we end up better off. Joe thinks my analogies are always tortured, but I think it's an ability for Dartmouth to be able to confront these issues and adapt to this changing landscape and make sure its own processes are able to adapt, that we can hear the input and respond to it relatively quickly.
Joel, I'll aim the next question at you. It's been 5 years since the Our Green Future report was released, and given what we know about the latest climate science, and this sort of is riffing off of what Rick said in terms of being able to pivot quickly, President Biden just announced a whole new set of much more ambitious goals for the United States. And they are goals that scientists say are what we need to do in order to avoid the most catastrophic climate change. Some would probably argue they're not aggressive enough, but they're certainly way more aggressive than where we have been. Given that, are the Our Green Future goals aggressive enough? And what might we do to make them more aggressive? Given the constraints of physics and finance and all the juggling of priorities that Rick mentioned, should we be doing more faster?
So it's a really interesting question, Rosie, right? Can we do more faster? Yes. Should we, or are we able to do more faster and still be able to support the core business of the institution? I think is the challenge before us, with resources not being unlimited. How do we invest our resources to do the most for the institution? So if you look at the goals that the report set out 5 years ago, they were fairly ambitious and aggressive relative to what we were doing and saying as a society at that point in time. They are still reasonably ambitious and aggressive. The question is, are they aggressive enough? And one can always argue that we should be doing more. But when I look at our rate of greenhouse gas reductions over the past 5 years and look at what it would take to meet our 2025 goals, we're making progress, but we're not quite on track, right? We need to double or triple our rate of greenhouse gas emissions reduction in terms of CO2 equivalent to meet the 2025 goals. And so, I'm avoiding the question. I'm not going to answer it directly because there is a strong argument to be made, let's be more aggressive, but it's meaningless if we don't have the ability to make progress towards achieving those goals. And so my bias would be right now, what we need to do more than ever is make sure we're taking the steps to meet the already ambitious goals that we've laid out before us.
Sure, maybe worth mentioning, and Rick or Josh, feel free to comment on this, that the progress towards those goals is sometimes patchy or jerky. Mm-hmm. That some of the big investments we're going to make are going to take big bites out of our greenhouse gas emissions. So those things don't necessarily happen on a kind of smooth, linear downward trajectory, but instead in kind of fits and jerks. It's worth noting that the Our Green Future report, the recommendations were in some part based on the G7 goals at the time. So I do wonder if President Biden's, and there's a little bit of a, if we say it, we will build it kind of thing happening here, right? President Biden is sort of saying we're going to hit this really ambitious 2030 target, and we don't know 100% how we're going to get there, but we're going to set this target so that we force ourselves to get there. so that we accelerate the rate at which we invest in these technologies, and so that we implement policy that pushes us there. And one could argue that, colleges and universities are microcosms of that same principle. So I don't know if Rick or Josh, you have comments.
Well, I mean, I think, Rosie, that in some ways the transition to hot water is kind of part of that approach, right? We don't fully know all of the technology that is going to get us there. And I think Rick mentioned, our climate, where we are in the Northeast with cold winters, we have challenges that places in the Southwest don't. And, our ability to use solar, the time of year when we need the most energy is also the time when the solar is least effective in our region. So, I think we are headed in the right direction, and I think some of the foundational things that we're doing are allowing us to take advantage of them as we can.
Rick, do you have anything to add on that? If we say it, then we build it kind of vein?
No, I mean, I guess I'm of two minds about that. I think on the one hand, it's absolutely true that we need to challenge ourselves. Our students should be doing it. Our alums should be doing it. Our faculty should be doing it, and they are, and it helps move us forward. On the other hand, it's kind of banal and easy to say, if we say it, then we'll build it. The reality, as the person who needs to find the resources and help make the allocation happen, that's far more easily said than done. And we could say it, do it, and stop need-blind admissions, for example. And I'm not sure that's where we want to go. Or we could say it, do it, and eliminate basic science research because it's expensive to support it. And I'm not sure that's where we want to go. So on the one hand, I completely embrace the notion that we need to be pulled, pushed, and we need to take a stand. We need to commit. But it's not so easy as if we say it, that's how we end up doing it.
So if I can just add to that, Rosie, I think what we may all be saying in different ways is we want to set goals that are ambitious, maybe even aggressive, but achievable. And it doesn't mean easily achievable with today's technology, but with some reasonable projection and anticipation of the direction technology will take us over the next 10 years. What do we think we'll be able to realistically achieve? And so it's a matter of how much risk and uncertainty we're willing to tolerate in setting those targets, right? If we anticipate that technologies would need to get 10 times more efficient and at the same time 10 times more cost effective, we're probably kidding ourselves. But if the gap is smaller, right, that's where we can be ambitious and aggressive, but realistic at the same time.
And I think Joe's point about how much risk are we willing to take is a good one. If you had suggested to me 8 years ago that I could get the trustees of Dartmouth College to authorize investing in a conversion to hot water in a meeting in which I told them, I don't know how we're going to heat that water up 10 years from now or 8 years from now, but we need to do this, and there will be evolutions and we'll be experimenting and it will happen in the future. There's no way that would have flown. But in today's environment, the trustees understood it. They were willing to commit to it, and they're going to take the risk that we'll figure it out.
I wondered if, Rick and Joe, you've been at this for long enough to see that sort of shift in direction from senior leadership, college presidents across the country and boards of trustees. I wondered if you guys could comment a little bit on that and the direction you see it going. It feels to me, having been at Dartmouth for 10 years, that it is a pretty different decision landscape for senior leaders, for folks that are making board level decisions, that they're seeing the environment differently and decisions around climate change differently than they were 10 years ago. I don't know if that's reflected in your experience.
Rick, I just gestured to my screen and pointed to you, but.
I'll do it. I think there is no question that across the globe, people have become more aware of not just the problem of climate change or the existence of climate change. And there was a comment in the chat talk about the risk of not doing it, of the risk of not responding and responding as fast and as hard as we can. And everybody's going to have their own view of how fast and how hard. But I think there's much more broad acceptance across leadership of all institutions that this is no longer something we can chat about and acknowledge and feel smug that we understand the science problem. This is something we need to act on and act with alacrity.
So thank you, Rick. And I'll just build briefly on what he said. I think there's not a punt the problem down the road mentality amongst leadership and amongst the board, certainly. I think there's a willingness to, in all decisions that we make, look for ways for Dartmouth to be an exemplar where we can and to be a leader, right? Realistically, but ambitiously, as I said before. And so to think about what we can do to make sure our teaching is outstanding and best in class, what we can do to invest in our research, our faculty and the work they do with students, but also think about the campus in a way where sustainability and environmental impact of our choices and our energy choices is part of the conversation. And I think that that feels very different to me than it did when I first started attending board meetings 16 years ago.
Just kind of circling back around to that, Joe, I don't know if you remember this, but you and I had a conversation probably about 10 years ago when you were the Dean of Thayer about using our campus as a living laboratory, and particularly giving Thayer students an opportunity to kind of get their hands on real projects on campus. And I, now in your leadership position as the provost and looking, towards Lehigh and becoming a president, you're thinking about these sort of higher order strategic priorities for colleges and universities. And as we think about the relevancy of the college educational experience, it seems like that kind of hands-on learning and experiential learning is a really important part of that story. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the role you see our campus playing in that part of the Dartmouth experience and supporting the mission in that way. Because traditionally, colleges and universities haven't looked at their campuses as their physical campuses and letting students kind of tinker with that physical campus or experiment or explore that physical campus even as part of the educational experience. People like Josh and Rick were running the physical show, and they were supposed to make sure that the students could have warm, dry classrooms and plenty of chalk and whatever to get school done, right? But I think there's a little bit more of an interplay now, or at least the opportunity for that. And that was something you identified 10 years ago as potentially interesting for Dartmouth. And I wondered if you have any thoughts about it now.
Yeah, so Rosie, I remember that conversation quite well, and I still firmly and ardently believe that finding ways to utilize part of the campus physical infrastructure as a living laboratory is a huge opportunity. It's an opportunity for students to learn. It's an opportunity for us to, students are going to ask questions and think about potential solutions in ways that'll be very different than the staff, than the faculty who conduct research in the area are responsible for overseeing the facilities would do. But we do, of course, to your point, need to make sure that the classrooms are warm and dry when we're educating our students in person during the winter, which we will be doing again next winter, live and in person in our plan to return to normal operations. And so, right, how do you strike that balance? I mean, here I'm going to pivot and put the question to Josh and Rick, because it's really a facilities question. I think you've got two leaders here, not to put them on the spot, but who philosophically are very open to finding ways to do this in a way that can't jeopardize the necessity of our delivering core services to the campus, but to find ways to engage students and faculty in conducting experiments on our actual physical plant. That would be hugely, hugely a win for us. I think that's the last thing I'll say. Rosie, I remember well when we had this conversation a decade ago, we were speaking about what was then the new McLean building in the Thayer School of Engineering, and trying to find ways to instrument and control energy usage in different classrooms. And so students would have the opportunity to learn from that feedback and see what we could do to adjust behavioral patterns in those spaces to reduce energy consumption. So these are the kinds of experiments I think I'd love to see us have a way to conduct and allow.
Yeah, and I'll add, we've had students, the Engines 8990 course, we had a group of amazing students that helped us and really helped us to reaffirm and think creatively about this strategy. So we opened up a lot of the data about our campus buildings and our energy usage. Those teams did some amazing work, both doing some modeling on kind of our current buildings, but also looking about, what's coming down the pike in terms of emerging technology. And I think the work there affirmed our strategy of focusing on the conversion from steam to hot water and energy efficiency. And I think also inspired us to think about that this is not going to be just a single solution, that there are going to be a lot of different things that need to be, knit together to make this work. So, I think that's a great example of how these types of, big institutional projects can engage with our students and academic community and really help us think more creatively and push us in, out of our normal lanes of how we normally operate business. So, I mean, that to me was one of the most energizing pieces of this work as we were thinking about how to, move forward and whether or not biomass made sense. I mean, some of those student presentations, I played a really big part in that analysis.
And I would just add, it seems so long ago, but before we went on winter break in 2019, we had drill rigs out on the green in Hanover, and we had donuts and coffee with students. And, I think the opportunity to do engaged research with students, and not just when we talk about our community, with our student and faculty community, but frankly, with the community of Hanover as well, as Hanover makes its own commitment on energy and sustainability, how do we partner? Because we don't exist as an isolated campus. We are part of a larger community. What are the opportunities for our students, our faculty, and the town to collaborate together? And I think they are large, and I think putting on my financial hat, there are opportunities to attract funding for research that would keep our faculty and our students engaged, that we absolutely should be chasing, whether it's biofuels or in the life sciences or engineering down at Thayer, or computer science and modeling, or at the Irving Institute for Energy and Society. There are so many opportunities. And I think the strongest way to support this move forward is to continue to tie the very fundamental blocking and tackling of heating and cooling the campus together with those opportunities and knit them in a sort of seamless web.
That's awesome. I did want to give a shout out. There's a lot of folks on this call who've done that kind of work in various ways, or faculty on this call who've done courses that are focused on the campus, and their students on this call who focus projects on it. And I think that goes a long way. One interesting thing is to think about the sort of silos of Dartmouth in terms of how we have, our organizational structure. And something I've always wondered about is the extent to which it's in someone's job description in, say, the engineering department of campus services, not the engineering department at Thayer School of Engineering, but to provide support for student projects, because often it becomes an issue of sort of time and energy, and it's difficult to add that to a full plate of, as you said, Joe, keeping the classrooms warm and dry. So there might be some interesting opportunities to think about how we engage people in campus services without inhibiting them from doing their job in that educational process in I don't know, more streamlined or productive ways. We have some good questions bubbling up in the chat, and I think some hands raised. So I'm going to one final prepared question, which is around accountability. We've talked a lot about ambition so far in this discussion, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how we hold ourselves accountable. If Dartmouth is going to move forward to a truly green future, how do we hold ourselves accountable to our goals? No one's this is not law, right? The goals that we've publicly stated are not law. They're ambitions. So how do we hold ourselves accountable to those and to continuing to push further?
My quick answer is we hold ourselves accountable by communicating and being transparent about it, by letting everybody, we've announced goals, we're transparent about the work we're doing, we're transparent about a pivot away from biomass, participating in events like this tonight. I would worry about accountability if we started to disappear from the landscape and not talk about either our goals or the work that we're doing to try to achieve those goals. We may not be perfect in hitting everything, but hopefully if that happens, everyone will understand why people will have been along for the discussion as either goals changed or our ability to hit them changed. But it's ultimately through transparency and communication.
Yes, so I ditto that. I wholly support everything Rick just said. I think if you think about an institution like Dartmouth at a high level, right? How does the president hold himself or the institution accountable? It's by regular engagement with and reporting to and conversation with the Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees asking key questions about different aspects of our operation. And so it's being transparent about decisions that we make. It's about talking about our long-term goals openly. It's about acknowledging where we have to pivot, when we have to pivot. And so I think the work that your office is doing, Rosi, the work that we're trying to do to hold ourselves accountable by setting goals, declaring them publicly, tracking our progress, and as Rick said, having conversations like this where we're openly talking about it, having student interns who are asking you and asking us about it, that's what will hold us accountable to our goals. It's reminding us of the importance of this by having these public conversations and being very open about the progress that we're making.
Great. And I can't overstate the importance of President Hanlon publicly stating our goals in 2017. To me, that was a landmark moment, because by sort of putting them in the paper, by publicly stating them, they, sort of the same way you tell your friends about an ambition, it makes it real when you've shared it with someone else. And in Dartmouth's case, it makes us accountable when we shared it publicly and can be held to it. We're going to shift now to taking questions in real time. So there's two ways you can submit a question. You can put one in the chat, which some of you have already done, or you can raise your hand and I will call on you and you can ask a question of our panelists. So maybe, well, you see any raised hands here? Anybody got a hand up? Got to turn on your camera if you're going to raise your hand. Simon, why don't you go ahead and ask a question?
Great, thank you. And so this question is for Provost Helble. And so first off, we've seen your announcement this morning of your recent appointment as president of Lehigh. So huge congratulations are in order for that. And so in these final months together at Dartmouth, what do you sort of plan to do tangibly, if you will, to ensure that these sustainability efforts keep moving forward even after you're gone in August?
So thank you, Simon. Appreciate the comment. And I think what I can do is exactly what we've discussed, right? I don't think there's a step change that needs to be made. I think it's continuing to talk openly about our goals. It's monitoring progress towards our goals. It's making sure that my successor is aware of the importance of being open and transparent about the goals. It's making sure that individual will work with Rosi in the sustainability office in support of those goals, and knowing that, perhaps the single most important tangible thing I can do is making sure that she or he is aware of the important work that's taking place in the Office of Sustainability.
Thank you.
Kellen, why don't we go to you?
Sure. Hi. Well, first, thanks so much for coming up and talking here. This is really helpful. I have a question. So I was working in the sustainability office back in 2017 when this announcement was first put forth. And one of the things we've been talking about quite a lot here is heating and this heating and energy infrastructure. But there were a huge number of other aspects to this report which we haven't talked about at all today. And I was wondering, and some of which the goals were very unclear and the goals were make goals. So I'm curious to hear if any more progress has been made on that, and if there would be more plans towards these sorts of things in kind of the line of what you were saying about, experimentation and looking to future technologies and these sorts of things.
Rick or Josh, you want to take that?
Well, I think in some ways, Rosi, you'd be ideally positioned to take this one on, but since you're moderator, you get a pass. I think all of your observations, Kellen, seem exactly right to me, that there were goals to create new goals and it was a little squishy and ambiguous. There is no question the focus has been directed primarily at the energy one. It just felt so large and we needed to get it moving and get it going. There has been some work on food sourcing and menu planning and thinking more about sustainability and dining that I think has made some real headway since that report. And maybe this goes to our earlier discussion, I think it is important that we pick that back up and we develop some goals because I do think goals can drive behavior change. And maybe that's something we can leave for Rosi to get a group convened to help articulate something more specific. So short answer is we really focused on energy, and some of those lagged. We are making some progress, mostly on dining, but we've got more work to do.
And worth mentioning, the Our Green Future report bit off a lot, right? Chewing it is sort of another matter. And, you know, the Sustainability Office is a small but agile team, but, you know, we can't kind of get to everything at once. So I think that's a really important point, Kellen, and we certainly have a lot of work to do. Rachel, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. Thank you so much. So my question is a bit more of a clarifying one. Something that was said earlier on in this panel, I believe, referenced the way Dartmouth structures its admissions and how Dartmouth has a need blind admissions process. And it struck me as though that fact were almost being used as a bargaining chip in terms of where money is going at Dartmouth. And if we were to invest more money in some of these more pricey energy solutions, that might be taken away, and Dartmouth would have to consider more the financial prospects of its students in the admissions process, which is a sort of distressing thing to hear. And I'm wondering if we could get some clarification on that. And if that is the case, and I did hear that correctly, why that is the most obvious place to cut from rather than things like executive salaries.
So Rachel, that was not at all my point, and I apologize if that's what I left with, and I can see how the confusion could arise. I was simply trying to highlight that in running Dartmouth, there's always this tension, but there is not limitless money. There are almost always limitless ideas and opportunities. And so investing in one requires a shift from another. And I was only highlighting that we are absolutely committed to need blind admissions. Make no mistake, you can write it in blood, you can write it in my blood. It's not a bargaining chip, it's not going away. It wasn't intended as a threat. I was actually just trying to highlight, here's something that's super important. I think I picked it because we're so committed to it. And then there's another investment opportunity. How do we think about balancing these things? And it can't all fit into everything we want to make happen and see opportunity in, we can't fund and make happen. How do we make those decisions? Really sorry if it in any way led to the impression that I was bargaining with it. I'm not, we're committed to it. Make no mistake.
And just for emphasis, I will say the same thing. Need blind admissions is not on the table and is not going away.
I'm trying to keep track of order here. I think we'll go to Wyatt and then Emma.
All right, thanks so much. So a bit of a segue away, but you guys mentioned energy efficiency a bunch earlier, and I'm really curious about the infrastructure renewal fund that was announced a few weeks ago. If you have any details about how funds will be allocated, how that'll be prioritized, I'd love to hear about that.
Sure, thanks. And it's a great question. That actually is going to be one of the funding sources for moving from our steam piping to upgraded low temperature hot water piping state of the art. That is completely a legitimate funding source for energy efficiency upgrades to buildings. I think that's part of what the trustees had in mind when it got approved. It's also a funding source for residence hall renewal that will inherently involve energy efficiency upgrades. It's also a source for upgrading our IT infrastructure. And so again, it's another one of these, there are so many great opportunities to use that fund. How do we think about allocating it? Ultimately, it will be the decision of the trustees after we make some recommendations. The initial bucketing is to imagine a pretty heavy emphasis on residential renewal for undergraduate housing, the energy infrastructure renewal, and IT renewal.
No, I'll just add to that, Rick. I mean, our team in campus services is looking at this in a lot of different ways, but we look at parts of our system that are failing. So we have some really old steam systems. And so rather than just fixing them and having them kind of limp along, we're looking for opportunities to, rather than do that, let's replace it with something more efficient. And then there are some areas where we can have some really big impact right away. And so we know there are buildings out there where, they, with a deep energy retrofit, could, cut their energy usage by 30 to 50 to, in some cases, 60 or 70% if we go really deep. So we're looking for those opportunities and prioritizing them. And then at some point it becomes a conversation of, all right, how do we kind of methodically go through the whole campus, and how do we do it kind of district by district? So there are a lot of pieces that we're weighing, but this fund really kind of gives us a clear line of sight to how we're going to pay for some of them, which is really exciting.
Okay, we're going to go to Emma next, then Mary Tobin, and then Michelle Wang. So Emma, take it away.
Thanks. So my question has to do with the role that students play. And obviously, as you said, like students do a lot, profs do a lot, and it's kind of to hold Dartmouth to its goals. The students and the profs should continue to remind you all that this is an important thing for us. And so I kind of have a two-pronged question in that when does sustainability become something that doesn't have to be reminded and just becomes a value of the Dartmouth administration? And related to that, if none of you are able to speak to the like Dartmouth's moral obligation, who would that be in the administration for students to talk to, and how could we get in touch with them?
So Emma, I'll take that because I think I'm the one who said a lot of the things you're talking about. I think in speaking for Dartmouth's moral obligation, it's fundamentally the trustees who are the living representatives of Dartmouth writ large. And it's not that any of us couldn't tell you what we think about what Dartmouth ought to do. And I think you're hearing that tonight. I would also say, if I somehow implied we needed you all to remind us that sustainability is important, you should go away with a different view. I spend a third maybe of my time in my role doing things that are focused on addressing sustainability, changing Dartmouth's posture. Josh probably spends 50 or 60% of his time. We don't need to be reminded. It's what we wake up and do every day. The role that you could play is helping set goals and helping hold us accountable, continue to ask how we're doing in the progress against those goals, continuing to ask those questions and do your work. I think one of the things that we struggle with in all aspects in a college of involving students is so many of the things we do occur over a number of years that is a span longer than a 4-year term at Dartmouth. And so part of it is, and Sustainability Office helps with this, how do we build mechanisms for student engagement that can also adapt to the reality that the students are going to be changing over the time of that progress? And I think we could do better, but we're getting there. And I think the Sustainability Office is a big piece of that.
I'd like to just add to what Rick said briefly, because I think I commented on asking you all to remind us and holding us accountable and the importance of being transparent. I view it this way, and I'd answer your question this way. I think it's a collective and shared responsibility, right? We are a community and we should collectively always be openly talking about it. And so that was not in any way to suggest it's on you, the students, or it is on the faculty. It is all of us collectively to be speaking about the importance of these goals, to be asking how we're doing in our march towards meeting these goals. And if we're not getting there fast enough, why not? And what else might we do? And so this wasn't deflecting the responsibility. This is really meant to say it is a shared community collective responsibility.
Thanks for that. And worth saying that one of the ways that Dartmouth values sustainability is by supporting the Sustainability Office. We have a Sustainability Office, and Joe's, I report to the provost, and the provost funds a big part of our office. And I have a dotted line report to Rick and Josh, and they fund a big part of our office. So that's a sort of investment in sustainability and how we serve you. Mary Tobin, and then Michelle, and then Zach.
Yeah, hi, thanks good to see everyone, and thanks for the Sustainability Office for putting this together. So we've mentioned a lot that building energy efficiency is important and kind of the foundation as far as Dartmouth's energy transition. And I was curious if the college has anything in writing for the engineering firms that'll be helping work on these projects, as far as, for new construction, what are some of the technical things that should be considered for, like, water temperature, for example, or some of those measures in writing with specs for new and existing construction to help kind of accelerate that?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely are including all of, so we don't have a written policy posted somewhere that says this is where you need to how you design a building, but we have built into all of our processes, what does it mean to have a high performance building, requiring energy modeling anytime we're doing a significant building, and setting some goals in terms of how do we look at that energy modeling, how do we make decisions based off of it. I think as we get further into this conversion from steam to hot water, we will learn some lessons from some of the early ones and probably codify those lessons and put those into the future work. But I'll say, I think part of the value of these 2017 goals is that those get included into every single one of the RFPs that go out and really inform the design standards. And I think we can continue to push on them, but we are using them to make decisions that drive us in the right direction. One of the more recent ones that I can think of is the renovation for Dart Hall that's happening right now. Some of the work that we had done looking at the value of energy efficiency, we decided to spend almost $500,000 more than we normally would have to add insulation there. It's a hard building to insulate. And so, it's a really old building and you have to worry about the structure and, how does modern day insulation work with a building that wasn't designed for it? And ultimately we made the decision to spend that extra money in this case because it ultimately on the long term made sense. Didn't make sense in kind of financial terms over the next couple of years. But when we took that broader picture of what we're trying to accomplish, it was kind of a no-brainer. So I think all of these things collectively work together to drive us in the right direction.
Josh, let me just jump in. Mary asked something that's very near and dear to my heart, which is water temperature. And the fact is, as we do this conversion to low temperature hot water, Mary, we absolutely will have a design standard temperature and everybody will get it and say, you need to make your building work at this temperature. And for those of you who aren't energy nerds, it is an incredibly powerful and important element of how efficient we can be. Yes, Mary. Yes, I am so 120. Yes, but it was
Energy dark time.
Yes. Oh, Mary, thank you. That was like the best part of the evening.
So Michelle, you've got the floor.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This has been a really enlightening event. And so I'm just curious, related to maybe the previous mentions about the function and duty of the Sustainability Office. Seems like their job is incredibly important, and they're being tasked with creating these new goals, making progress towards fulfilling all these colleges' promises. And having worked in the office as an intern, I've been really, really impressed with the work they do with such a small number of full-time staff. At some points, I think just 3 people. And so since the office seems so imperative to fulfilling these ambitious goals, I'm curious to know, what is the budget given to the Sustainability Office and or amount of money dedicated to full-time staffing, these people that essentially seem to be in charge of really important things?
Rosie, I'm going to turn to you to answer that. I should and wish I had an answer to your question, but since in the end I oversee the budget of all offices on campus, I can't answer that question on an office.
Joe has a lot
basis.
of direct reports. I promise we didn't pay Michelle to say any of those things or ask that question. So our budget is primarily focused on really 3 things. People, paying the people that work in the Sustainability Office, student interns, which is a big chunk of our budget, and then what I would call experiences. So paying for meals and subsidizing immersion trips and doing things like that. And in total, our budget is about $500,000. So about $500,000, a little upwards of that. And we have a variety of funding sources. We receive funding from the Provost's office. We receive funding from campus services to provide services to campus services, to show up at meetings and talk about things like LEED and building performance standards. We also have a small revenue stream, or not revenue stream, but small amount of support from gifts. We have a couple very small endowments that support portions of our program. And then currently the President's Office supports the Sustainability Core. So the Sustainability Core was one of the things that was adopted from the Our Green Future report. The report recommended that we engage students in the process of assessing where Dartmouth is and holding ourselves accountable to our goals. So Marcus and the Sustainability Corps are supported by funds from the President's Office. That's actually a 3-year pilot, and we're in the last year of that pilot. So we need to make the case that we need to continue doing that kind of transparency and reporting. I think the work that the Sustainability Corps does is critical because it provides us really good, all of the charts and graphs that you see on our webpage come from that process. A lot of the information that we were able to give to 8990 and to other student projects and that make the campus more accessible as a living lab come from the Sustainability Corps. So that's maybe a little of the back office of sustainability, but it gives you a sense of how things work.
Although I would just jump in and say, Michelle, before we funded more full-time staff positions, the place that I could see investing more is funding for the core that Rosi talked about, or new research projects by students or classes or faculty. I think there's real opportunity there. And I think legitimate opportunity as we move forward with some of these conversions to say, we need to answer some questions before we move in a particular direction. And how do we use some of that capital funding to fund that research?
For context, Dartmouth's operating budget is about, I don't know, Joe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but about $900 million a year, something like that. Somewhere around there.
Yes, our overall budget's 1.1 billion, but about 200 million of that is research support and pass through. So yeah, about 900 million.
For context. So Zach, I'm going to turn to you, and then that'll be our, Lucas, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you to put your question in written form. That'll be our last question, and then we'll close out.
Thanks. So in my experience, anything kind of climate or environmentally related to Dartmouth has been siloed into either the sustainability offices that we talked about, or like the Irving Oil Institute. And kind of going back to Emma's question, I'm curious, how do we make sure that this is built entirely into the infrastructure of the Dartmouth experience? Because it kind of said that like this is a collective or shared responsibility, which, yeah, I agree that it is. But I think it has to be admitted there's an inequality of power when it comes to what can be done. And it seems like the trustees are more able to wield that power than students. And I want to know if maybe you could commit to this sort of town hall every term or every month to hear from students and their concerns, or something that shows how progress is being made in a very transparent manner. And so again, my main questions are just how are these commitments being built into the infrastructure of Dartmouth's core values? And yeah, just how do we do that and make sure that students are really getting what they want done?
So let me answer your question this way, Zach. I don't see having an Office of Sustainability as in Rosi's position and the work of students as an indication that it's siloed. We've got a box. Anything related to sustainability is your and their and her responsibility, and that's the only way it gets done. I view that as an investment in the core importance of sustainability work on our campus. I think the campus investing in the office is an indication that it is a core value. I think President Hanlon's commitment 5 years ago to set ambitious goals is an indication that it is a core value. And I think the work that Josh and Rick have described, focusing on the large, immediate, big goal in front of us of the energy system, is a commitment to the importance of this work. And so I can't answer your question about, it'd be easy for me to say yes to a quarterly town hall because alas, 3 months from now, I won't be here. And so I don't want to.
You can go ahead and commit, Joe. Commit the next.
I'm going to jump in, Joe, because Zach, this may be a sad commentary on my day job, but this is way more fun than most of my day job. I absolutely would commit to, I would love to do it more regularly. And I'm not sure what the right interval is, but I'd love to work with Rosi on it. And I suspect Josh would too.
There you go.
Sign me up.
Given that, how can the next provost not say yes?
It's easy. When someone's not at a meeting, you can sign them up for whatever. We are at time, and I want to be very respectful of everyone's time. I want to thank our panelists very much for taking time out of their evening, their family life to join us tonight, and their very busy schedules. I also want to give another huge shout out to Jess and Rachel and Jasmine who organized this event. They did a fantastic job. So congratulations to you guys on pulling off something awesome. And I just want to conclude by saying, I think, you know, having watched how Dartmouth changes over the last 10 years, I think it's a huge pleasure to get to work with Joe and Rick and Josh. They really do care about these issues. And I cannot tell you enough as students, as alums, as faculty, that you showing up here, you showing up at office hours, these are kind of water on rock problems. And every time you do that, you're saying, I care about this issue and I want Dartmouth to be accountable to being a climate leader. And so even though that doesn't always feel as quick as you would like it in terms of the rate of Dartmouth's change, you're having a huge impact. And I really appreciate all the alums who are on the call that did that when they were students. All the students who are on the call do that now and do it when you're alums, because it really does make a huge difference. So thank you all. We will capture all of the remaining questions. Sustainable Dartmouth interns will pull them out of the chat, and we will get those in written form and try to circulate some answers to the mailing lists we used for this event, so you can all find them. Maybe post them on the sustainability webpage. Thanks so much. Have a great evening. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Rosie, and thanks, everyone.
Have an awesome one.